everyone, and good whatever wonderful moment of the day you are enjoying on your time zones. It is always the highlight of my day whenever I get to welcome you on a Hacking HR conversation. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your host for the next hour. And we have Jessa backstage taking super good care of us. So if you enjoy the conversation, please make sure you give her credit and appreciation. She always takes such great care of us. We will be talking today about data and people analytics, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers, and they will help us connect the dots between people, culture, and strategy data. Without further ado, I will ask Jessa to bring them on the screen. And while they pop up, I will encourage you all to drop us a short note in the comments. Let us know where you're listening in. It's always such a joy to see where Hacking HR gets around in the world. And also, I will encourage you to consider the chat your own conversation space. Consider the questions raised within our conversation as much your own as it is our speakers, and drive your own conversations. So, given the fact that Hacking HR hours feel shorter than regular hours, what I will do, I will start with our signature move. So, you know the drill, your Hacking HR friends and panel veterans. So, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen clockwise. That means, Matt, you will go first. Susie, you will bring this round home. And the first question is easy. So, please just shortly introduce yourselves and also give us a small taste of your perspective on data. What is your relationship with data that you bring into our conversation today? So, Matt, welcome. So good to see you.
Good to see you again. Looking forward to this conversation and looking forward to the chat with this great panel. My name is Matt Burns. I'm an industry analyst, a former HR executive, consultant, and tech employee. My relationship with data, I kind of look at data like an accomplice. So for me, data has been a big part of my career, helping to shape stories, build strategies, and ultimately make work better for the employees that work with us. So I'm looking forward to today's chat.
Thank you so much. Carrie, what a joy.
Thank you, Manola. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Matt. Matt, I was in Vancouver last week and I didn't see you in person, but it sounds like you're not there anyways. Carrie Brown, I am a customer transformation advisor with Celonis. So my relationship with data, I am a non-techie who's lived in the tech world most of my career, and people have been my focus. So I look at data as, I like the accomplice idea, but almost as more than a necessary evil, but it's part of our lives and increasingly so over time. So when I think about it, where it sits with me now, it's the hidden gift that keeps on giving. And I think about it in terms of facts are friendly. So the more the data we have, the more information we have to make good decisions, understand what's happening, and help people in the way that they work. So to me, it's a facts are friendly kind of approach that the more we have, while it can seem overwhelming, if we know what to do with it, it can be really helpful.
Thank you so very much. Manisha, what a nice surprise to see you in this panel.
Thank you, Manola. Always good to, in your sessions, and looking forward to this panel discussion as well. I'm Manisha Gupta. I'm more on the business side and product technology. Having led bigger teams made me move towards this industry of using data to understand people as well better. In fact, my HRBP incentivized me and almost provoked me a little bit 10 years back on, you are the technology person, go fix it. So that's what I'm doing. Currently, I'm with Oracle. I'm leading the People Analytics and HCM Analytics product suites for Oracle. I would say my tribe is HR a lot more, as well as its technology. I love the accomplice word, Matt. I think for me, I would say data is a strong partner that keeps me honest. It also has that evil part of it, Kerry, you alluded to a little bit, because the fact is, it's not just the data, it's what our questions is and what do we do with the answers that matters, right? So data can be as good of a team member, as good of a team coach we can be with it. Otherwise, it can take us in different directions as well. So that's what I try to do with creating products that help companies worldwide to use the data properly and answer the questions that I would think need to be answered.
Thank you. And Susie, welcome to the Hacking HR Data Funhouse. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. I like that you call it a fun house. Nice to meet you, Manola, and everybody else speaking. So it looks like a strong Canadian presence here with Matt and Carrie even visiting. I'm just south of Toronto. So my intro is I'm Susie, and I'm a global business executive, both on the HR and business side, now working fractionally as chief people. And my relationship with that is I grew up in finance and then, in various ops roles and then on the HR side. So a long history with data. And I would say like the main thing is really around what Manisha said, right? Like it's about using the data, asking the questions. I think actually one of the biggest challenges we have right now is there's so much data, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just like, how do you cut through that to find out what's most important to look at based on what you're trying to solve today, right? And to figure out what are those lead indicators. So sometimes just going back to basics is good. But I'm sure this conversation will be very interesting and we have a great panel. So nice to meet everyone. Happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you so very much. And I loved this first round of introductions and your perspectives. And Susie, you anticipated my next question because we talk so much about people analytics and people data, and we mean so many things by that. So my first question is, can we demystify a little bit what we mean by people analytics? And you also helped raise a few prompting questions, like how much data is enough? How much data is too much? How do we look for accurate data? How do we filter and sort for meaningful data? So all these small questions, if we can demystify a little bit what this people analytics label covers for. And what I will do, I will not call on anyone to start off, and let's just practice the unmuting competition. I see some of you are muted, some of you are not. Let's see who grabs the e-mic first.
I can start first, just because you started talking to me. Can you hear me?
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay. So yeah, I think in terms of just explaining on the most baseline basics of people analytics, I always start with like people movement, right? People drive the organization. You need a team to drive your company to achieve its goal, right? So you need to understand first, how many people you have, right? How many people you're adding, how many people are leaving and why, and what are the dynamics around that? Like that's the base, like the first line of just understanding. As any like HR executive, you should understand your HR population, all those different movements. Like that's the biggest swipe, and just understanding what's going on with those. And those are driven by the business strategy, right? So how many people you're hiring to add to your workforce would have to do like, what are you driving as a business? Like, do you need more sales reps to do something? Are you building a lot? Do you need software people, etc.? So I don't know. This is like really, I'm starting at the bottom so everybody can add on because there's so much more to it. And it's the inferences from that, right? So like understanding your turnover, understanding, I don't know, internal movement. Like you can just keep on layering and layering in terms of your understanding your people analytics. But if you don't have the basics down, then you can't really talk about it. No one can understand it. So I always like to start super basic. Who are we talking about? Who's coming and going and why? Yeah.
And I'll piggyback on that. Certainly the baseline of who's who in the zoo, who's in the organization and what they're doing makes sense. And then I would actually say then turning inside out, I think that for HR to understand, to your point of where does business strategy come in and what does the business need, my litmus test around a lot of this space is how do people's jobs change and what's going on in their space. So people absolutely doing their day jobs run the business, whether they're manufacturing something or making something or selling something. So I actually think of people data as being the data that shows what people do when they do their jobs. So in addition to the HR centric data around who there is and how many and so forth and what they're paid and performance management and all of the aspects there, I think that the data that looks across the entire organization at how the organization is functioning and running and being is what helps shape and inform how many people you do need and what they're actually doing in their jobs and how that work is occurring or not, ... So it's kind of like everything, not necessarily financial data, but that's another outcome of what people do. But a lot of the data of how the business is actually running, to me, is also people data, because the people are the people running the business. Matt, I see you nodding your head, so I'm going to flip it over to you.
I knew you might do that. I don't like following Carrie because she always says what I'm going to say before I say it. So I have to come at this from a different angle. I would say that for me, I would start, and Susie said it really well. The maturation of your people analytics practice is a measure of where you are today. And where you are today is fine. Don't be worried if you hear people talking about the fact that they're working on prescriptive analytics and taking things to the next level in terms of their practice. If where you're starting from today is an Excel spreadsheet when you're managing turnover and vacancies, that's fine. I think the key piece for me, what I learned the hard way as an HR executive, was the most important data is what the business finds important. And if you're trying to sell your internal practice, you need to align your practice to what the business finds important. I'll give you an example. If I think that engagement is the most important thing, but the business is focused on turnover, I'm not going to bring them an engagement scorecard and talk about that. I'm going to focus on turnover, and then I'll relate it back to engagement so they understand the link. But what they care about is engagement, turnover. And why that's important is, let's be honest, HR teams, all of us, often lack resources. We're always fighting for finite resources internally, whether those are human resources or financial resources. By aligning your people analytics practice to the needs of the business, you're going to attract more investment, both of financial and a human resource capacity. And then once you build that momentum, it becomes a virtuous circle that you can build on, demonstrate success, that gets you the proverbial seat at the table. And then you leverage that into a conversation about the meaningful things that HR can do to drive business success. And I agree with Carrie. Ultimately, any activity that occurs inside of an organization is a people practice, but you've got to start to what matters with the business first, or they're just going to discount your efforts and you won't be able to advance your practice.
Manisha, you're on mute.
I'm on mute.
And
Okay,
again.
better.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I guess a technology person cannot use technology sometimes. So I would say, from the vantage point of where I sit working with different companies, there's three different questions that need to be sometimes answered around people analytics. Who is the beneficiary, right? And so far it has been primarily HR, but increasingly it needs to be executives and managers. And it's not true in every company that I work with yet, for different reasons we can talk about. And then also employees, right? So most of the high performers also want to understand what capabilities and what options are available. So really it's three different beneficiaries, and all three of them will look at people analytics slightly different. And maybe we call it different also. So now we have started calling it HR analytics is for HR, people leader analytics is for executives, and then maybe people analytics somewhere in between. And I think everybody said that it is in the end, we are working together in a company to deliver some business outcomes. So it has to start with why we are together, why are we hiring, why are we growing, why are we keeping these employees to deliver business outcomes, right? So people analytics is about connecting whatever your workforce investments are, and how are you doing a good job of those investments to deliver business outcomes. And I mean, there's a lot of things in between, recruiting, retention, all those are, honestly, they're HR business practices. But in the end, if you talk to an executive, they're not asking about recruiting analytics or compensation or benefit analytics, right? Their questions is very singular. Am I hiring a high performer who's staying long enough at the right compensation for the market? So really 4 questions. Am I delivering business outcomes? Am I recruiting the right folks? Am I keeping the right folks? Am I growing the right folks the right effective way, right? And I think Matt or somebody or everybody maybe said that. How do we make it happen? So it's the who, the what, and then how. You got to meet the executives where they are, right? So if the focus is on retention at the board level and you start talking about recruitment, you're going to basically just not be able to ring a bell. And in certain organizations, I like where the CEO is like the person who's leading people analytics, right? That is like wonderful to see, because culture, strategy, people, the interconnection is very clear and obvious, not happening in every company yet. And we are moving very fast in that direction. So you got to meet where the executives are, where the budget can flow. And I also like to say, start small, one use case at a time, maybe one matrix at a time, just retention, just headcount. Headcount is kind of boring, but just retention, just recruitment, just how fast did you achieve a result? How many JIRAs did you close because you had the right people? And then show results and then rewind, repeat, right? So again, again, sorry, Minola, I think all of us can go on forever on this topic, but hopefully that helps.
This is definitely a topic generous enough for a whole series, and a bit of a spoiler alert. That series is coming quite soon. But back to our topic. As I was listening to you, a question popped in my mind. What are the key skills and competencies? And I don't want to restrict them just within the HR function, but what are the skills and competencies, the key ones that really increase our chances of making the most out of data and people analytics? And this question comes with extra points for skills and competencies that are not necessarily the usual suspects. So if anything pops in your mind that is something like the underdog in terms of skills and competencies when it comes to people analytics, I would be very happy to hear about it. And Matt, I saw you smiling very wide when you heard the question. So please lead us into this.
I'm just trying to beat Carrie to the punch on this question because she's definitely going to do that. I have 3, and I think 2 qualify as bonus points. So I am a big fan of the ability to synthesize, to curate, and to tell stories. So we talked about this when we kicked off the session. There's so much information in most organizations. So even though you may be working with a singular spreadsheet or your analytics practice maybe just beginning, the fact is you have a lot of information at your disposal. This may not be of the quality or of the recency or of the availability that you would like, but you have data. So the ability to synthesize and cut through all the noise and ask yourself, what should I be paying attention to, is a key competency of any leader. And it's where most of us get hung up. We get overwhelmed with trying to boil the ocean, and we have to focus on being simple. Curation is also really important because, as I mentioned earlier, we have to eventually take this data and bring it to a stakeholder group. If you're sitting in a box looking at numbers and running analysis, not sharing with anybody, then you're satisfying your own curiosities. You're not actually moving the business agenda forward. So in that case, you have to be able to curate information in a way that's going to resonate most with your audience. And that audience may differ. You will present different information to your executive or your board than you will to your employee base because they care about different things. That doesn't mean you shouldn't provide full visibility to all groups, but you're going to organize the information in a way that matters to them and then encourage them to be curious if you want more information. And then storytelling, at the end of the day, numbers are kind of boring. Like, as much as they're revealing, if we just say, hey, the number last month was 8%, the month before was 9%, that's my report, it doesn't really tell you anything. And when we talk about people analytics, the most impactful benefits are the stories that you can pair the data to. So I think the ability to contextualize the information and make it real for people in the context of your employees brings it to life in a way that will incite more action, which I think we all should have, a strong bias for action when we're doing people analytics.
Carrie, I saw you unmuting yourself. I know your finger is restless.
You mentioned it briefly in there, Matt. My skill and competency I want to add to that is curiosity. So I see some of the comments in the chat of where there's data, if it's HR data or not HR data. There is a lot of information to be gathered that exists in the organization, which really is HR indicative and people indicative, but isn't HR centric. And so I think the curiosity of looking at what you're seeing around performance and business performance starts to tell you more, or as much, frankly, about people's execution of work and who you need and what you need. So when I look at the skills and competencies, I couldn't agree more in terms of storytelling and curation and the distillation of information, because there is so much. I think the challenge with data is, more is not more, less is more. And so being able to distill down to the specifics, and very much, it's interesting, again, reading through the chats of the comments of what will leaders see, what will they care about, what information do they hear. Putting yourself, to me, the other is empathy, putting yourself in the role of the people who are going to consume that data that you're sharing can allow you to provide them the story that's going to make the most sense to them. So sitting in their chair, looking at the decisions they're trying to make around business strategy and being able to help them navigate through that, which isn't typically from an HR lens. Yes, it's ideal if a CEO is leading that charge, but if they're looking at it from a capacity standpoint or a growth standpoint for the organization, understanding those metrics for them that you can feed and serve that curiosity and that empathy, I think, are some of the things that really can help you make the data make more sense to them than to you.
Anisha.
I can maybe add, Carrie, you stole all my words, by the way. Uh, so I think curiosity, I will just say curiosity to also connect with the people. Oftentimes we were in fact having this intellectual kind of conversation with a few folks on manager effectiveness, right? So normally what you find is a manager who's very curious about like just knowing what else is going in the world, how many kids do you have, all that stuff. They're very connected. And when they're connected, they also understand the context of the data much better. Otherwise, just data without any managerial acumen, it's like Matt, you said, it's just data, right? And you don't know how to apply it. I'm trying to solve a diversity problem in middle of Arkansas for a role where there's no female, and just data is just, it's pretty wrong signal at that point. But if you're connected with the people on the ground, you understand how to really leverage people analytics better. I think the last thing I would probably say, maybe a little bit more beyond empathy, is influence. HR, let's say, can see a story, can see all the connections and all that stuff. But at some point, if we can't get all the EVPs and the executives and the CXOs in a room and say retention is a key problem and here is why, and everybody needs to be aligned, then it remains like an HR facilitated and HR-led initiative. Versus like Susie, I love the fact that a finance person is an HR. So attrition and retention eventually has a financial impact, right? And so that story needs to be told in such an influential manner at the right level that the right minds are thinking, right? And I mean, retention needs to be everybody's business, right? So how do you influence as you are? And I mean, what channels do you go through to eventually hit the mark with the CXO so that they make it their problem? I think is key.
Yeah.
Susie, you're in the hot seat of going last.
Yeah, it's always fun to go last. You're listening, you're like, yep, that totally makes sense. And I think like what I wrote down is like the number one to be really good at reporting and HR reporting is understanding the business, right? Exactly what Manisha and the others have said. Like if you know what's going on in the business, what would be useful, like, and you can be a good like creative thinker, but what would be useful to know, given what we're trying to do, right? And at the end of the day, from the HR reporting perspective, you're an enabler, right? You enable people to make decisions. You're also, I was thinking like you're saying, talk about influencing, Manisha, I think relationship builder. So if you see my personality, like I used to be a financial auditor and people are like, what? Like how, with your personality, like, why would you want to go and like reconcile? I was very good at it because I was good at building relationships, because I don't care how smart you are. If you hit the ground and you go to some country, to some business for a week, you're not going to understand everything. But if you can make relationships with people, they'll expedite your learning about it, right? And then, you can understand the context of what you're doing. And this is no different than HR reporting. And I think the more you can partner and build relationships, it builds credibility. You learn more about the business, and then you can, enable those discussions. You need to own your piece. So the other piece I know is the obvious one, but I think we're remiss not to say you have to be accurate, right? And you need to be clear on how you're calculating things, because that is the number one knockout, like for anybody who's trying to present from HR or from anywhere to talk about any metric, is that it's accurate and knowing where it's come from, and it's clear on how you explain that. So there's a bunch of things that I think, you know what I mean? Like the other thing I think as well, just the last one that I had written down here is to be good at HR reporting, because there's so much coming at you, you have to have an ability to say no to requests. You have to, because then people will ask you for everything. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to see, like, I don't know, the green thing, the orange thing, the purple thing, the one on its head, whatever. And you're just like, well, wait a minute, what are you going to use that information for? You go down 5 questions, nothing. Okay. So that's like what happens a lot in reporting. So I think if you want to be really good at HR reporting, you have to keep people focused as well, because they'll just ask you for anything because they're curious, or especially like people who don't want to actually look into the data themselves. Like you can waste a crazy amount of time not focused on the right things. So
I see a lot of standing ovation equivalents going on in the chat, and this is definitely an amazing conversation to witness firsthand. Now, Carrie, ever since you disclosed your litmus test, you pretty much brought this upon yourself. And the next question is, how can data and people analytics help people do their jobs better?
I appreciate you asking. And I think it's interesting to me, even when I think about a lot of our answers a moment ago on where we're at, and the final comment Susie made of HR shouldn't be the one providing all the information on people about people. So how do you equip the organization to be able to have information on how work is happening on its own? If I look now at the kind of visibility that organizations can have as to how work occurs through business process modeling and process mining and all the kinds of information that show where I'm succeeding at my job, where I'm failing at doing the job the way I could, how do I get triggered back to training so that all the assets that HR is looking at to try and have people do their jobs can be leveraged. I see that as a gift for how people can do their jobs differently. So, if I look, so Manisha, you're at Oracle, I was at SAP for 20 years. I think of all the information you'd create as people did their jobs to see how work is occurring. Now, to Matt's point of how do you distill, I think it's interesting that we can get the kind of granularity to see what's occurring and get insights around where is everyone making mistakes? Where do people have problems? Where are there issues in a particular process? Is that something that we can automate or change, or do we not have enough talent in a given area so that we could look at using technology to balance off between where we use the experienced people versus a lack of talent? All of those kinds of considerations to me can help people execute their job better, more faster to get to those business outcomes, and help people. I fundamentally believe people come to work every day trying to do a good job. I don't think anyone comes in saying, I think I'll be a crappy employee today. I'll make a mistake. I'll waste time. Nobody's doing that. So where we can give specific information on what's happening and then give that information also to the people who are doing that work, then you're getting a partnership on how the work's happening by the people who are doing it to look at how to do the work better, which makes their lives easier and better. So that to me is people data in the broadest sense, not the HR sense, but it starts to look at if you're doing planning for resourcing and you're understanding growth capacity and you're looking at recruiting and you're looking at turnover, all of that data. I used to say to executive teams when I was SAP, do you understand your business roadmap, your technology roadmap, and your people roadmap? Like how many people are you expecting to have in the next 1, 3, 5 years? How does that map to where your business is going in the next 1, 3, 5 years? How can technology be a part of that? And all of that to me is the people data for how work gets done. And I think that allows us to help individuals do their work differently, managers to manage the work execution, which people are doing differently, and to get to those business outcomes where HR is a business partner to facilitate and feed that machine that helps the organization thrive. So I really see a lot of the data across an organization being, and the specificity we can now get it at with process mining to change the way we can help people execute their work. And if they were doing it perfectly, we wouldn't need to do anything, but people make mistakes because they're human. So let's help them be more effective. Lots of nodding of heads. I'm going to pass.
Yeah, who wants to jump in? Let's go diagonally. Susie.
Which piece would you want me to comment further on? I just feel like Carrie gave a really deep overview on it.
Well, pick something that really resonated with you and just run with it.
And in terms of the reporting, I think one of the things I wanted just to share is that, today actually, as it was so timely, I saw that 10% of organizational strategies make it. Right? Like they're actually successful, and if you look at it in terms of like just, where we're at with HR reporting, et cetera, like I think this just shows the importance of having data-driven discussions, right? And people have opinions. And when you think about HR, I've been at that executive table so many times, like everyone here. And I just think that you present an idea. It's not like finance. You go there, people, trust that CFO or whoever is there, that they're got their debits and credits right. Nobody gets into their details. But when it comes to HR, they're like, well, like all of these different things happen. And I think like when you look at like strategies not hitting it and like the role of like data kind of being related to that and how we can play a role, I just think that the reality is that we are the gatekeepers and we need to make a difference going forward in how we actually get credibility around that table. Right? Because we have a seat there. We need to present things again, like Carrie's Like I can feel her, you know what I mean? She's really deep into like meaningful jobs and jobs that have impact, and job design is a huge thing going forward. Right. And HR reporting at that level is very different. It's ops, right? Like it's like, you know, and it's critical to the business success. So it's like, how do you actually drive those discussions? Like, it would be interesting to hear like how Carrie does that and how she actually uses that data to power how they're structured and how they actually execute on their business's success, right? So anyways, I'm just saying for this, the point of, you know, strategy and data, the way to line this up is really to try to get people back to a data-based discussion is the first step, the very first step.
Thank you. Let's see if Manisha or Med want to build on this. And then I will take you up on the invitation for Carrie to deep dive on this. But first, let's see. Manisha, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah. I'm also curious, Carrie, because it is a problem I'm at least attempting to operationalize and productize. And I'll maybe just share my perspective a little bit with you. I think, I mean, the seed is transparency, being data driven, but also being transparent, right? So like, for example, you give feedback, right? I mean, I almost feel like now I have a visceral reaction for somebody giving a feedback and not sharing it with the person. I mean, unless there are some small chances when you probably don't need to or cannot share the feedback, but the standard is a manager asks for a feedback for somebody else and two people are giving feedback on each other, and they don't even know what the context of the feedback is, right? So I always ask my managers to say, hey, why don't you do like win the trust of each of them one by one and then have a three-way conversation. Assume they have good intent, assume something was missing in the context, and if you've done it 3 times, that conflict resolution conversation, and it still is a problem, then maybe it's a different kind of a problem. But most managers kind of still resist that, right? So that transparency, without that, why am I doing what am I doing? Am I doing a good job? Am I gelling well with my folks? Do I have a bigger context? Like employee doesn't understand that. Similarly, like you keep climbing up the ladder, that problem, the 10% is probably at every step in the ladder, something is getting amiss, right? Because something is not transparently being talked about. And the more, at the executive level, transparency is pretty amazing. Like they will talk pretty much very clearly about, even if it's a tough conversation, we would have that, right? Because we need to have that. But then something happens systematically where at the ground level, by the time we reach an IC, we just feel that person will not understand the whole context. We will not provide the whole context. Sometimes we'll just box them in small boxes. And in the knowledge-based industry, I don't think those boxes are really yielding really good results for us, right? So either hire a person who you can trust. Don't hire if you don't trust that person, or hire a person, vet them, pipeline strong. Hire a person when they bring in and say, this is the big context of the team. You are doing this chunk, and these are the peripheries in which you need to be, working with each other. So I think like data is great, but holding the data too tight for some folks and believing that, my interpretation is the only interpretation which is going to be true for everybody, I don't think is doing justice. I'm personally a huge proponent of building really good analytical, tools where an employee can see their journey and, maybe a peer benchmark, maybe PII data removed, but people like you have created these journeys within the organization, or managers like you have done so much more, like this manager, every time this manager crosses some girl's trajectory, that person just booms because that manager is doing something wonderful, versus there are 3 managers who, you can move in the organization, but nothing moves. Nobody moves for the next 5 years if the person is in this management. There's so many answers we can, create and provide in a like PII, a vetting manner that people will get the peer benchmarking perspective. So yeah, I mean, Carrie, really keen to maybe understand from you further, unless Matt has something to share, how you're doing it, and even what challenges you believe are in the way for us to operationalize it across all companies.
So Matt, you have a chance to speak before Carrie.
I feel like I'm in the way of Carrie's update. So Carrie, over to you.
Okay, I'll give an example. And so this is not, if I look at the full scope of what the HR organization owns, thinking about people doing their job. So there's the HR specific data on headcount and performance management, but there's also how do you onboard and how do you build and develop people and how do you train them and how do you look at, I see some of the comments in the chat around accountability and execution of the work. I'll take a specific example. When I joined this company, part of what I did is I went to find the people who I knew who lived in the people space to say, hey, by the way, did you know you have this gift of information? And one of them was in an oil and gas company. And this is an example of where typically this kind of information gets built and grown by IT, by business process design, or maybe industrial engineering, somewhere that's in deciding what the business does. And often the people who are deciding that forget that there's people who do that work. And those people are who HR is carrying and feeding and growing. And in this case, there was a piece of the business where IT and the process designers were looking at, well, how do we better improve the way we execute against this particular division and how that work occurs. Simultaneously, there was a lot of growth in that division, and the person running that division had gone to the learning manager, who was part of the HR organization, to say, we need to build 400 new people to do the work in this space. So that company has a whole bunch of people on their training team who are going and doing training needs analysis to see what are the jobs and what are the roles and how do we build those roles and what's in them and how do we grow those people and recruit for the right talent and skills. When over here, there's a whole bunch of data saying exactly how that process is happening, where people are making mistakes, what they're doing right, wrong, or indifferent. And connecting those two things can mean that the training needs analysis person can look at what's happening and understand it, and then curate and create a learning path and a learning journey that matches to a role which reflects the work that actually occurs. So rather than interviewing to say, what is that job? What does it need to be? How do we build that? You can actually look at and see how that work is happening and glue those two things together. So often what I'd say in this space is a lot of the information that is being created and owned and built by the systems or the process side of the business is super valuable to the people side of the business when you look at the fact that people are who's doing that work. So when I think about people data, I'm not uniquely looking at the HR metrics and HR KPIs, but all of these pieces of work that I talked about are things that HR is ultimately responsible for in terms of building good employees. So that's one example. Another is, you live in this, Manisha, in the ERP world. When you put in a new system of any kind, ERP or otherwise, you change the way work happens. And ultimately, you want people to be able to do their work well and pick up something new quickly. So when you're looking at this kind of information again, you can say, all right, we've turned this on. We can look at the way work is occurring and see what are the 10 biggest mistakes people are making. What are the areas that we could do lunch and learns or more training? How do we take and connect to where somebody makes a mistake and triggers them back to the training asset that learning has built so that they continue to reinforce that same process? So these are all ways in which the business data or the process execution of work starts to become people data, because people are the ones doing that work. And when I think about an HR person, learning person, change person, looking at how do I help employees thrive in their jobs, there's a whole bunch of information here that either for a super user or for hypercare in the situation of a system going in place to look at how do you drive user adoption, which ultimately is how people do their work. So those are some examples. I could certainly talk a long time, Manola, as you know. But those are the kinds of examples where I think we in this space, in the people space, sometimes forget there's gifts of information in other places with people who are thinking about how is that work happening? What are the KPIs around process execution? When people are the ones doing the process. So they've got stuff for us too.
Manola, can I ask her a question?
Of course.
Please. Yeah.
So Kerry, I think you said HR needs to be responsible, or at least I heard that. Do you believe it's HR? Or my take is HR
I believe that if HR doesn't plug into these spaces, then they're losing their seat at the table around the business outcomes that the business is trying to get to. So whatever business you're in, producing, manufacturing, shipping, selling, etc., that's what people's day job is. The employees who work for a company, their day job is to do their job. They happen to be a human resource that human resources helps manage. But I think that HR needs to be able to understand and play in the space of where people do their jobs versus on the side spectating and observing.
No, is it fair to say HR facilitated operations owned?
HR facilitated operations owned. I think HR makes the resources available that can execute against it, and operations owns the execution. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. just to add, like, I think, Manisha, that's a good question. And Carrie, like, there's two things that I think when I heard your discussion as it relates to kind of scaling businesses as well as HR. Job design is an area, for example, myself, I get asked all the time, like, what's your expertise in job design? Because right now, especially with the changing kind of landscape with technology, AI is like the big thing this year, obviously, right? How is that going to change our jobs? And how do you actually, use data and the technology together to create a workforce, right? Your workforce is people and systems, right? Kind of working together in harmony. So this job design thing, I think, is a huge topic. And Manola, if you're going to go deep in this area, like, I think that's a cool topic. And then the other thing is, like, when you're doing analytics, I think you gave a good example of, like, you need to analyze what people need right now. Right? Like, when you get into, like, making reports and, like, you get things on cycles, etc. Like, your second example was really about doing analysis and giving results of, like, these are the top 10 things that are the biggest problems, whatever. Right. So I think that that's so important to make sure you're aligned to what the business problems to solve are. And there's a part of this that is, like, ongoing kind of baselining, where you need to have consistency in metrics so you can understand what's going on about, like, how things are, like, going in terms of, like, the core HR metrics, but, like, including, like, engagement, like how people feel, etc., all of that stuff. Then there's a whole other line of work where, like, strategically picking, what to work on that will be impactful today. And as HR people, we need to be, able to, like, navigate through that. Another skill would be, like, being good at asking good questions. Right? Like, to figure out how to do this. It's like it sounds so basic, but it's so true. Right. And even how to manage questions on the other side when someone comes back and be like, okay, so you have a 3 there. So, like, or 355 there, like, where did that come from? And then why is this? And why is that? Right. So I think as people are thinking about getting into reporting, it's just understanding that whole question management piece both ways. Like, how do you get up to speed on what you need to solve and how to solve it? And the other side is, like, once you present something, how do you navigate that too? So I think that one's hard. And I see a lot of people struggling with that right now because they're trying to learn that in a virtual environment or hybrid.
And that's exactly what I want to piggyback on. The other piece of this is we've gone to some combination of hybrid pretty much everywhere. And organizations want some visibility on what's happening. And employees want some visibility that what they're doing is getting seen. And so some of the kind of accountability and visibility into process execution and work gives both those parties the information they want. The organization wants to know that work's occurring. The employee wants to know they're being seen as doing it. And that starts to give some transparency when we're not necessarily sitting down the hall with somebody can see what they're doing. And that builds some confidence and some comfort, which starts to feed into engagement and culture and all of the other aspects of strategy that we've been talking about.
So before we enter into the last 15 minutes of the day, if you can believe it, we're so close to saying goodbye. I just want to take a few seconds and do say a warm welcome to everybody who joined a little bit later. And if you feel like you missed out on a great conversation, you can find the recording on hackinghrlab.io or just check out our LinkedIn space. Now, I want to create a space just to acknowledge the energy around technology. And I honestly cannot think of a conversation over the past few months where generative AI wasn't mentioned in some way, shape, or form. So this is the moment where we do have quite a few minutes to spend on talking about the technology around people analytics. And Manisha, I know this is very near and dear to your heart. So could you please pioneer us into this part of the conversation?
Absolutely, Manola. I am going to start by saying technology is an assistant. It's humans are still the rulers. So let's be very clear about that. And the other thing is what technology is used for is also dictated by humans, right? So we have to be very clear. I think Susie just said, asking the right questions. Why am I using generative AI? What is the use case? What's the business problem it's solving for? And yes, Gen AI is comparatively new, definitely pretty, pervasive at this point, but it's still an assistant, right? So for example, if I'm using it for, hey, help me write my goals based on the goals my managers have set up for the team, it's a great assistant. But if you say, hey, tell me what how I should solve this project going forward. Like it's not like it can help you test your hypothesis pretty well today, but the human still has to have some hypothesis. Like you still have to feed him the right information. I talked like Jenia is my friend, but so him and her will come out of my mouth. But yeah. But basically, like this robot, which is guiding you, is only guiding you based on how somebody or you have trained it. So be very specific in applying it at the right spots, right? So, like for example, Oracle is working on healthcare. So I'm not ready to say, hey, let's use AI to figure out the right schedule, for the nurses to meet the right emergency patients yet. I mean, you'll still need a human eye to detect it. Maybe it can support it. Okay, looking at the free schedules, looking at the nurse capabilities and skills and the patient care demand, connect the two and surface up a potential or three potential ways of scheduling. And then a human being still will have to come and use it. That being said, it is pretty strong, right? For certain use cases, help me scan a resume, or based on these, like exactly, Kerry, I mean, imagine, I think it's possible, it's going to be possible. I'm going to look into the data on what is working, what's not working, what are the skill gaps, where the issues are, feed all this information and say, now, based on that, can you please revise that job description and fill in the missing gaps? You never talked about quality was missing, and I see 10% of my use cases quality is missing, and you still keep hiring for people who don't have quality checks in brain. I think that will be a good use case, and I'm going to try to look at it. Okay, so thanks for the tip. I mean, basically looking into operating data and making things better, absolutely. Gen AI, everybody wants it. We are very specific in which use cases. I again think it's a help me write a resume based on the 10 other resumes. It's happening today, but what's not happening is the use case Kerry brought up. Help me make the resume smarter based on what's missing in my organization, right? What's happening today and is possible today definitely is goals. So based on what goals have already been set up, what my past goals is, what my quota attainment needs to be in sales, help me write a goal, great. But I think again, look at the operating details to figure out what else I could have a goal as is probably the next layer we can go into. I would say, I mean, in the end, technology also, even beyond Gen AI, cloud technology, big data, AI, ML, the best thing in HR analytics is unstructured analytics, right? Unstructured data. So text, voice, images, which finance never asked for, sales never asked for, supply chain never asked for, and so we didn't have it. Only like recently, sentiment analysis, tokenization, connection between when you say somebody is not engaged. Is he not engaged because of the company, because of the direction of the company, because of the manager, because of the product, because of career path? So what's the connection between an employee sentiment and what is the tokens you can identify today in unstructured text? What is the relation with the tokens? So I'm not happy with my career. And if I drill deeper, like imagine a network graph, I'm not happy with my career. My career is connected to the strategy of the company and the manager. Those connections can be found much easier. So where it is useful is start at an aggregate level so human beings can comprehend tons of data, and then being able to drill down in a systematic manner, take action. Beautiful at that, right? Beautiful at being an assistant. Just don't use it as your master. Then you will lose it.
Thank you, Manisha. Matt, I see you unmuted, please.
Generative AI provides a shorter path to the answer, but it still requires a human intervention to arrive at the conclusion and ultimately take the actions that you arrive at through the analysis. So Manisha said it well. And go back to my previous comment, synthesizing large sums of information. You can build today with generative AI an individualized learning pathway that reflects 360 feedback, performance evaluation, coaches' notes, operational KPIs, and then you can blend that with role profiles, third-party data, the latest thinking from Josh Bersin and Gartner and Dave Ulrich, and put it all into a wonderful development stew and give people tangible draft structure around conversations. But you still want to have that person's leader sit down with that employee and map out the development objectives and align on the steps that each of them are going to take in order to achieve those outcomes. What it does is remove the subjectivity from it because you're relying upon so many more sources of information. Previously, you relied upon leaders, and Manisha mentioned this earlier as well. If you have a leader that's consistently developing employees at a faster rate than their peers, they have a bit of a secret sauce that they figured out to be able to tap into somebody's unique skills and sell that person internally so they can have upward growth. But that's also something that needs to be taught as well. Most of us as leaders can identify that most of the learnings that we have received didn't come from an MBA. It didn't come from a policy manual. It came from our peers, people that we relied upon, conversations like this, people who were live living it. But the ability to ingest all of that and look at it in a broad scope really just allows us to be a little bit sharper and a lot more consistent, because then you don't have the big variances from person to person that you may have in today's organization. So, I'm looking forward to a path around AI, but I just want to also paint the picture that AI is like any other technology. What you put into it, you will get out of it. So if you don't put good intentions into this AI, it will become a productivity tool that will be used to increase employee expectations without any extra support. Or you can use it for a tool that actually makes work better and creates space in your employee schedule so they can spend more time building relationships, building their skills, and ultimately looking at a more long-term view. The decision is frankly ours to be able to make and to sell internally in the organization. And if you think people aren't having this conversation right now, you're sorely mistaken. This is an opportunity for HR to be part of that conversation and not simply have to administer a generative AI policy based on an executive meeting that happened that you weren't part of.
So
Thank you.
maybe I give a couple operational thoughts about generative AI. I think, like Matt, your points are well taken, and Manisha's, and I go back to Manisha's original point about you're still the master. You are the owner, right? It's not the AI driving you. And I think right now people have this like fear of missing out, like AI is such a hot thing. I want to do this, like let's go, right? And if you think about rolling out anything AI that automates things, right? Like that you just let it go and use that and let it do its own thing. You need to think about parallel processing, right? So if you're thinking about, rolling out an AI process, like I can tell you, like, I think it's 6 years ago now, I was using AI. I was on the business side on the claims, just to give you an example, like on a claim side, claims processing, when someone made a travel claim, like to try to make a machine smarter, like to basically approve things that it could without approving things it shouldn't, right? And you could, if you mess this up, you could probably, be wasting millions and millions of dollars, allowing fraudsters through, all of those types of things. I give you this vivid example because you think about that application in HR or other things, right? So I think you can start with things that are like measure the risk, reputational risk, accuracy risk of using an AI tool. So for example, the goals one's a great one. You go in, you can use like ChatGPT, write me a goal, like goals that center around blah, 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 right? And it'll spit it out, low risk. You get that, you look at it, you're like, that's cool. That made me go faster. Matt's point of a shortcut. Perfect. You let AI rip and you put stuff in it. You need to think about what the implications are. I'm going to give you an example that I've been talking about in the last week. I'm writing up a post about this for next week, is about AI note takers. So if you're in HR, companies, everybody's like, oh, I'll just get a note taker. So much easier. I don't have to take my own notes. Okay, cool. There's a little bot. It goes in, it writes your notes. It can summarize them. I'm sure all of you have seen these things, right? Now what I'm seeing is coming up is HR issues, harassment claims, because people aren't thinking that when they're in those meetings, I'm saying, Carrie says Susie's horrible. I don't like her. She's like the worst thing that happened to this company. And Matt's like, we should fire her. And they talk about me all day long in this meeting. Well, guess what? The bot just wrote it all down, right? And then then you forward it over to Manola, who wasn't there, right? And I wasn't there, and then I get it, right? So I'm just giving you this is what's happening, right? Like AI, quickly use the note taker. It's so efficient. I don't have to take notes. But then it's just it's not a heavy lift, but it's just a thoughtful lift at the beginning as an HR person to think, okay, what are the parameters around this? And sometimes you have to hit the wall a little bit on it to figure out what they are. But I think this is just a recent example that I thought I'd share. So yeah, be careful with your private information too. As you feed that, especially in the HR space. And if you think about using ChatGPT, it consumes your information. It becomes part of their domain, part of their database, right? And you don't want that. Always use dummy data is my advice. If you're using something like ChatGPT and you want to know something directional, never ever personal details, as just a reminder for everyone.
Gary.
I guess my comment really echoes a lot of what Matt said. It's an accelerator. And right now it's an opportunity to be more comprehensive with information. The description he gave of all the kinds of data that you could pull together for a learning journey, we might want to be that comprehensive. We might not have the time. So it's an accelerant to what we would ideally want to do. I had a conversation about this recently with somebody who is a teacher, and somebody's like, is it cheating? I say, well, is using a calculator cheating? It depends on the exam that you're giving. And so is using generational AI cheating? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the questions you're asking, to Manisha's point earlier, what are the right questions we ask, and Susie as well. So I look at what I find exciting, mostly for me actually right now, and I look at generative AI, is some of the impacts that, when Microsoft 365 and generative AI come together, and privacy is a big piece of this. I'm just going to put that, asterisk over there. But the ability to look at all of my information and create presentations or reports or, distill images plus content together, the ability to give me a first draft of something that would have the breadth and comprehensiveness that I might not think of or do, becomes really exciting to think about how work will change. If I think about how people will be doing work in 10 years, 5 years, it won't be the same way we do it now. And, you look at the blog that Susie's writing or post she's writing, Susie could sit right now and say, here's the 3 or 4 thoughts I've got, write me a draft, and it would be there. Now, would it have the same wit, charm, interest, curiosity, creativity? Debatable, or not, but it starts to change the way that things can happen. What I think is interesting, where it's really a lift versus the threat of will work go away. Technology didn't make jobs go away. It made billions of jobs materialize. This will not make all jobs go away. It will change the way work happens. And so what I look at, though, is I think about, in my neighborhood, we have a local newspaper. It would be great if that could get generated by looking at what are all the events going on in this area code, postal code, and create that. So you might actually be able to start doing things where there aren't resources, where there isn't information, and people can source that and use that sort of intelligence to get the information that they'd otherwise not be able to see or not have access to. So what it's going to look like for jobs, it will change them for the good, probably. Is there some mess in between? For sure.
Well, each of you mentioned several times, I counted, the power of questions. And when you have a journalist as a facilitator, you can only, taunt me with the power of questions for so long before I have to ask you, do you have one or a few really powerful questions to unlock the magic of people analytics in your conversations? I know that it depends on the conversation, on the context, but can you think of a few questions that really, really sparked magic in conversations around data and people analytics? And I will give you just a few seconds to think back to your interactions. We're 3 minutes away from wrapping this conversation up. So I just want to thank everybody for taking the time and the curiosity to be here. And what I will do, we will go counterclockwise. So that means, Susie, you will go first. And in the interest of time, I will pass the e-mic around. So Susie, one question or a couple of really powerful questions.
Best question, what problem are you trying to solve? And what will you use this data for? Boom. That's it. Those are your 2 best questions. If you run with those, you should be good. Stay on point. All right, Manisha, you're up. We're doing fire rounds. Manola's on us.
We're doing punchline rounds.
Yes, let's go.
I'll give you 2. What will you miss if I don't answer your question? So your question has to be valid. And then very tactical. Let's look at the data to see why this team is more effective than another. And you can't answer it with one KPI. You have to see a lot of correlations.
Thank you. Carrie.
I'm going to go cheat and go back to my litmus test. How do people's jobs change? Understanding that tells you all the actions you've got to take, and how can data prove that what you're finding is true? Matt,
Wonderful.
Over to you.
How close are we to solving the organization's strategy and challenges?
Wow. Thank you so very much, Matt, Carrie, Manisha, Susie. It was such a joy and privilege spending this hour with all of you. Thank you to everybody who was here with us, either today live or later on the recording. Please keep this conversation alive. And like I promised, there is something really, really nice cooking around data and people analytics in the Hacking HR Kitchen coming soon. I hope I will have the privilege of welcoming you tomorrow to some people ethical practices discussions. And in the meantime, enjoy data, enjoy people analytics, and always, always ask great questions. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day, the rest of the week, and I will see you soon. Thank you. And thank you, Jessa. Thank you.
Thank you, Manola.
Bye,
Thanks for facilitating us so well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time flies. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.